During Vice President J.D. Vance's recent visit to Israel, he was asked about the involvement of Turkey in the plans for the Gaza Strip.
Well, I think, first of all, what troops are on the ground in Israel is going to be a question the Israelis have to agree to. And I'm sure that Prime Minister Netanyahu will have opinions about that. But we think everybody has a role to play here. Some of that's going to be financial. Some of that's going to be in reconstruction. Some of that's just in communication with the various parties to ensure that this deconfliction process actually works and is implemented. We're not going to force anything on our Israeli friends when it comes to foreign troops on their soil. But we do think that there's a constructive role for the Turks to play. And frankly, they've already played a very constructive role. We're very grateful for that.
And then in the joint press conference with Vice President Vance, Prime Minister Netanyahu was asked essentially the same question.
On the question of the Turks, I think, let me quote the Vice President from yesterday. He said that I have very strong opinions on that. And he also said, we have to do it with, Israel will be obviously decide together on who does that. So I have very strong opinions about that. You want to guess what they are?
Before we go on, be sure to go into the description of this video and download the free ebook that's available there. It is a collection of articles, of columns that I've written and that really provide my analysis since the beginning of the October 7th war. And it'll really give you a window into what we've been through since the war began. So go ahead and download that. Now back to the video. And according to the Times of Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu's office went further and stated unequivocally, quote, there will be no Turkish troops deployed in Gaza. Now, why shouldn't Turkey, a NATO member state, be involved in the international stabilization force? Doesn't Turkey have diplomatic relations with Israel? Doesn't Turkey have trade relations with Israel? Well, they did until recently. As reported by the Middle East Media Research Institute, MEMRI.org, Turkey was Israel's fifth largest trade partner in terms of imports until May 2024, when it ended all exports to and imports from Israel. And in August 2025, just a few months ago, Turkey banned Israeli vessels from using its ports. It forbade Turkish ships from entering Israeli ports and restricted its airspace to Israeli aircraft. Now, Erdogan's government has allowed Iranian guns and money to move through Istanbul to the Houthis in Yemen, who of course have been firing missiles at the Israelis for the last 2 years. So I wouldn't exactly say that Israel and Turkey have a peaceful relationship, far from it. Consider these recent statements by President Erdogan. Quote, Hamas is not a terrorist organization. It is a liberation group, Mujahideen, holy warriors, waging a battle to protect its lands and its people. That statement was made on October 25th, 2023, just 2 weeks after the October 7th massacre. Or how about this one? Quote, we will never shy away from voicing the truth that Hamas members are resistance fighters. Also from late 2023. And in September 2024, Erdogan came right out and said it. Israel is a terror state. Gaza is the world's largest children's and women's cemetery. Erdogan has hosted Hamas leaders in Istanbul, and he's granted Turkish passports to Hamas operatives. This is not exactly a moderate Muslim country. This ain't the UAE or the Saudis. Now, you might be thinking that maybe now in the context of President Trump's plan for Gaza, now that the war is ending, perhaps all the bluster will go away and the Turks are willing to work with the Israelis and put the past tensions behind them for the good of the Gazan people. Here's Vice President Vance making precisely that well-intentioned point.
They've supported Hamas in the past. No one who is a party to this conflict can look in the past and not point at something that they don't like or that they disagree with. Everybody who's been involved in this conflict can point at one other person. One of these flags can point at another flag and say, we hate that person for various reasons. The way that we're going to get to peace is to focus on the future, which is what the President of the United States has asked us to do. And we think everybody here is very willing to do that and is very eager to engage in that effort.
But here's the problem. This isn't about the past. Consider this. Turkish officials openly state that President Erdogan prevented Prime Minister Netanyahu from attending the Sharm el-Sheikh summit on Gaza that just took place. Turkish officials bragged that Erdogan, quote, would not be in the same photo frame or at the same table as Netanyahu. As a result, Israel was excluded from a major regional forum whose purpose was to discuss the future of Gaza at the insistence of Turkey. This is not diplomacy. This is a power play. Turkey is positioning itself to dictate the terms and exclude Israel from decision-making about the future of the Gaza Strip. If Erdogan is already blocking Israel from the discussions of what's supposed to happen in the Gaza Strip as best as they can, imagine what it would do with troops on the ground in Gaza. So it's obvious that Israel cannot allow Turkish troops in the Gaza Strip. Now, truth be told, Turkey is already operating on the ground in the Gaza Strip through a Turkish government-organized NGO called the IHH, Humanitarian Relief Foundation. But here's the problem. The IHH is not a neutral charity. It's not merely a humanitarian organization. It has a long and well-documented record of connections to terror organizations. According to Jean-Louis Bruguière, who currently is the chief of the European Union's and U.S. Treasury's Terror Financing Unit, the IHH has, quote, clear, long-standing ties to terrorism and jihad, end quote. Bruguière told NBC that the IHH was under investigation in the 1990s for assisting Osama bin Laden's al-Qaeda when they were planning to target U.S. airports. And German authorities banned the local branch of the IHH in 2010 for funding Hamas. Israel, for good measure, has listed the IHH as a terror-linked organization in the wake of the Mavi Marmara flotilla in 2010. You might remember that incident, which was organized by the IHH to provoke confrontation with Israel's Navy. And of course, on the Mavi Marmara, they found weapons, and it was obviously not a peaceful flotilla. In 2012 and 2016, weapons shipments to Syrian jihadist militias were traced to the IHH. And even a Turkish police report later revealed that the IHH helped move weapons and fighters for al-Qaeda affiliates in Syria until the investigation was suppressed, completely quashed by Erdogan's own government. And the European Parliament has described the IHH as providing, quote, financial and logistical support to radical Islamic terrorist networks. Allowing an organization like the IHH to operate in Gaza's reconstruction is obviously out of the question, but they're operating there as we speak. They're handing out water and they're providing all sorts of humanitarian services. That's the way these things work. You see, this isn't exactly the Red Cross. It's an Islamist network operating under the cover of humanitarian activity while also being supportive of terrorist activity. Now, you might be wondering what Erdogan's motives are in this entire situation. Well, over the last 2 years, we've seen the Iranian proxies all decimated by Israel. We saw the Syrian regime fall, and the Syrian regime was being propped up by Iran. And the Syrian regime fell, as we all know, to a Turkish-backed jihadist group. Ashara, or Julani, the new president of Syria, is a proxy of Erdogan. We talked about this in a recent video about how the Turks were rebuilding the air defenses in Syria to take away Israel's freedom of operation in the skies above the region. Erdogan wants Gaza to be under his influence because he wants to become a regional power. We see this in statements where Erdogan has compared Gaza to other theaters of Turkish military intervention. For example, in July 2024, Erdogan said, quote, just like we entered Karabakh, just like we entered Libya, we might do similar to Israel. Here, Erdogan is referring to Turkish intervention in the Armenian-Azerbaijani war, as well as to the Libyan civil war, where Turkey actually intervened militarily. In other words, what Erdogan is threatening here is military intervention against Israel. Now, Israel may have no choice at this point but to accept some amount of Turkish involvement. As you saw Vice President Vance say that the U.S. sees a constructive role for the Turks in the rebuilding of the Gaza Strip. But Israel must insist that that involvement be limited to financial contributions under full U.S. oversight with no direct operational or security role. This has to be a red line for Israel. To sum up, Turkey blocked Israel from the summit meeting on the future of Gaza. Turkey openly sides with Hamas. It uses charities like the IHH tied to jihadist networks and seeks to plant a Turkish flag in the Gaza Strip, just as they have done in Syria. What they're trying to do is rebuild a new ring of fire around Israel now that the Iranian proxies have been taken out, but this time under Turkish oversight. To allow Turkey any on-the-ground role would be catastrophic for Israel. If the world is serious about peace, this must be a red line. No Turkish troops, no Turkish flags, no Turkish proxies in Gaza, not now, not ever.